said, let's get started. And we are going to be making parsnip cakes or parsnip fritters today. Rachel, you're on. I'm going to put your screen share up in just a sec.
Thank you. We're in different spots this morning, as you'll notice. So forgive me for my first time cooking on screen. For week 2 here in our everything cooked in everything being fried season of History in the Kitchen, we're going to make parsnip fritters. And Lacey just put the ingredients up on the screen if you're cooking along with us, which is 1 pound of parsnips, 1 whole egg, 1 egg yolk, 2 tablespoons of flour, 2 tablespoons of cream, 2 tablespoons of sack or sherry, a half a teaspoon of sugar, a half a teaspoon of nutmeg, a half a teaspoon of salt, and whatever your choice for oil for frying is. We're going to use vegetable oil today because of me, and we are using cornmeal for gluten-free staff members. And that would be Lacey.
Yep, that's me.
So sack is, you'll see that in old recipes all the time. Sack was a fortified white wine from Spain and the Canary Islands. And the modern replacement is sherry, which is the only one of the sack wines still produced. So sherry is.
Can I pause a second, Rachel?
Go ahead.
I do want to say, if you are making this with kids, you can totally leave the sherry out and you won't be missing anything, but it does add a zing of flavor.
Yeah, it's a really nice flavor, but you will also not be missing anything. And if your recipe needs more liquid, you could always just add more cream. More cream never hurt anyone in my world. So that is the modern recipe. Do we have the old recipe, Lacey? So the old recipe is from Mary Kettleby, a collection of above 300 recipes in cookery, physic, and surgery for the use of all good wives, tender mothers, and careful nurses in 1734. And I have to say, like the sugar in this, is from an older recipe for parsnip fritters, and I kept it in here because I think it adds a little something. And it's not in this recipe. So if you want to take a minute to read this recipe to yourselves.
You've got sugar in here, Rachel.
It's in the
sauce.
It's in the sauce.
I forgot. Well, we'll let you read through this one, take a look at it. Let us know if there's anything that stands out, anything that's odd or different to you. Feel free to pop thoughts or questions or comments in the chat. I should say we are not making the sauce today, but feel free to have at it. Sauces for things like this are always super exciting. Rachel, we've got a comment, beat for 1 hour.
Lacey, I believe Lacey and I had this exact conversation when we found this recipe. So when I was testing this, how we're going to make it for this is it's going to be more like a latke, a sort of roughly mashed parsnip. But I do think that if you got out your electric mixer and you mixed it for 2 or 3 minutes with your electric mixer, and you got those parsnips really well smushed, and you got those eggs really well beaten in there, and you cooked them that way, you would have something that was much more like a traditional pancake than like a fritter. So I think that that's what they're talking about here, that if you beat it for 1 hour. And I have to say, Lacey, I see a lot of recipes that say beat for 1 hour. And even in the historical kitchen, I have never beat anything for 1 hour.
No, when we do syllabub or whipped cream, it usually takes about 15 or 20 minutes to get it beaten to a proper texture. And what this is doing both in those syllabub and whipped cream recipes and here in the parsnip fritter recipe is whipping lots of air into it. This recipe doesn't have any leavening in it. So that whipping that air creates that lighter air, more open structure that allows the fritter to do a little bit of a rise when you put it in the oil. All right, you gonna get started, Rachel?
I'm going to get started.
All right, let's go.
So I cheated and cooked my parsnips. I have to remember that the camera is backwards from what I'm looking at, and cooked my parsnips beforehand. These parsnips took forever to cook. The last time I did it at home, they cooked in about 5 minutes. So I think that there is definitely, depending on how old your parsnips are, there's a definite difference in how fast or slow they cook. So I decided I would do this beforehand so we wouldn't accidentally be sitting here in silence waiting for the parsnips to cook. So you're gonna cook them until they are able to be mashed, and then either with a fork or a potato masher or however you mash your potatoes. Just gonna squish those up. And honestly, if you like sort of chunkier fritter, leave it chunkier. Again, no rules. No rules when Rachel's cooking. And I did peel these. Definitely most of the nutrition in a parsnip is definitely in the skin. The skin though can be really tough, and often it's kind of ugly. So I did actually peel these. But probably if I was at home and I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I probably wouldn't peel them.
We did make these not long ago with a group of hearth cooks here on site. We cooked them over the open fire. They did not peel them before they boiled them rather than putting them in the microwave. They did not peel them. We ended up with peel in it. It was good. It did change the texture of the parsnips.
It sort of tastes fine. It's just it's definitely peel.
Rachel, can you slide your bowl towards the back of the stove a little bit? There you go. Nice. So you're getting ready to crack eggs in there, right?
Yes. So in a separate bowl, I am going to mix the other ingredients. So I'm going to do one whole egg. If the eggs cool. No, the eggs are not going to cooperate this week.
Sorry, I tried to get good ones for you. This has been the fall for anybody who's just joining us for the first time. This has been the fall of the eggs that either don't crack well or crack too well.
Oh, wait, I'm doing yolk. One yolk. I do this with historical recipes. Did you notice it says leave out two of the whites? And I always have to read that more than once to figure out, like, wait, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm using yolks or I'm using whites? And if you excuse me, I'm going to put this in our compost and wash my hands.
And for those of you who are curious about composting in the 18th century, that is something that people in the past did. They called it green manure, and it was very popular in gardens.
And definitely, if you were living with animals, you would throw everything to the chickens or put it in a slop bucket for the pigs.
Yep.
So we are going to add that. I'm using cornmeal.
So you just poured your cornmeal into your eggs, Rachel? Is that what happened?
I'm going to put everything together. And this is nutmeg, sugar.
Hang on, hold that up in front of the camera. We can't see it for a second.
Sorry. Thank you.
Other camera.
Other camera. Thank you. I tell you,
so
you need to remind me of this in January.
So the white stuff is salt.
Salt. This is a brown granulated sugar. And as of course, all 18th century recipes must have nutmeg. So you want to talk about sugar while I add the cream, and then I'm just going to mix it together.
So we've got 2 tablespoons of cream going into all of that eggy goodness. And while Rachel's mixing all of that together, oh, did you pour in your sack too, Rachel?
I poured in the sack and the cream, and I'm just going to mix it until it's smooth.
Yeah, so brown sugar, this is a recipe that was likely very accessible to people of that sort of middling, free artisan sort of people in Virginia in the 18th century. Parsnips were super accessible. Folks who had a farm were more likely to have access to cream. Eggs were pretty prevalent. Chickens were kept everywhere. Sugar though, is really fascinating. People of a lower social status in the 18th century were more likely to have access to brown sugar. Today, we use white sugar in everything. Brown sugar was a step down in the process from white sugar. So, white sugar is boiled multiple times to remove all of the what becomes molasses and sediments in the sugar. So, white sugar was the thing that people wanted to have. Brown sugar was a little bit more accessible for people who might not have as much money to spend on treats and things like that. So we went with a brown sugar today. Before you get into that, Rachel, we have a question from the audience about our parsnips.
Mhm.
Were parsnips grown at Gunston Hall? These particular parsnips were not. We did have to get them from the store. Our parsnips did not make it this year. They were very sad and very spindly. But I have some in the garden, hoping to have a harvest of them next year.
And that the groundhog does not eat them.
The groundhog should leave the parsnips alone. We have another question, Rachel, if you want to address this one. Was this dish made all year, or is it more of a fall/winter?
Parsnips, the beauty of the parsnip is it will last a long time. And there were sort of two ways people when I worked at an 18th century farm, there was always this theory that you could keep root vegetables in the ground and somehow they would stay fresh. That never actually worked for anyone. So I don't know if they had some sort of magic in the past where they could do that. But if you kept them in the root cellar and you kept them in straw or sand, or there were various different things were recommended for potatoes were kept in straw and carrots were kept in like
Carrots are
wood
kept in clean, dry sand or wood chips. Yep.
chips.
If you're interested, I want to say, if you're interested in learning more about this, I can totally recommend an amazing book published by Colonial Williamsburg called Vegetable Gardening the Colonial Williamsburg Way. We actually have it open on the table across the way in the library right now.
So and they last a really long time, and you know, even if they're a little like your carrots in your fridge, even if they're a little they last pretty far into the spring. And then I asked you when you harvest parsnips. Oh,
Parsnips you harvest after the first frost, so they get that sweetness that we really love about parsnips. So you plant them either in late winter or very early spring and let them go through the next year. In the garden right now, we have some self-seeders that I'm hoping will make it and have a really lovely season next year.
excellent. So before I mix these two things together, I just turned on my burner to warm up a little bit before I put the oil in. But now I am going to add the egg mixture to the parsnips. And mix those up.
So you've mashed those parsnips really well, Rachel, and you've added in all of the other ingredients which were beaten in advance.
Yep.
And what's the texture that we're looking for here? How do we know if we need to add more cornmeal or more cream or anything like that?
The times that we have made these, both here and when I have done it at home, I have to say that the texture has been different every time, and every time they have been delicious. So I think the answer is don't worry about it too much. These happen to be, oh, am I in the, where's the camera? There's the camera.
You got it. You got it. Yeah, they stuck to the fork really well there. They're very thick.
Yeah. These are sort of slightly looser than mashed potatoes, I'm going to say. But so far, anyway, they've not been bad. And like I said, I think that they were mixing them and making them more like pancakes. So obviously thinner is better. I'm going to add some vegetable oil, and their recipe says a good quantity of lard. I don't think they particularly need a huge amount of vegetable oil.
This is not one that you're deep frying. You want to get a good color on both sides, but it's going to be more flat than round, right, Rachel?
Yes. So I'm just going to let that heat up. You probably can't see the black pan on the black stove, but I'm
My
waiting. my oil to be a little shimmery.
Yeah, I was gonna say my rule of thumb is when it starts shimmering and you're seeing like mirages on the surface, that's when you know it's ready.
And then I usually cheat and drop a little in there and sort of see when it starts bubbling, which that is not. So I'm gonna, and to check if I actually have it on the burner, which is a classic Rachel move when I'm like, why is everything only cooking on one side of the pan? It's usually because I've only filled one side. I've only put the pan on one side of the burner.
Well,
So
while Rachel is waiting for that to heat up, this is a great reminder. If you have any other thoughts or questions for us, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'd love to hear what you have to say and what you want to know more about. Oh, I can see that sizzling back there. You can put some more in.
yep. So this is a super quick recipe, as you can see. And again, so the recipe is Spanish potatoes. The Spanish potatoes were sweet potatoes, as opposed to Irish potatoes, which were white potatoes. We still get a little hotter here.
Which is funny because they both came from the New World. So both I'm gonna brutalize, so I will step aside from the scientific names. Yeah, both sweet potatoes and white potatoes came from the Caribbean into South America. Ooh, the question is, are parsnips always white? I have never seen a parsnip that is not, but I would hesitate to say that there are no other colors of parsnip.
I've never seen a modern parsnip that was white, but if you told me that parsnips in the olden days were other colors, I would absolutely believe you because carrots were certainly not always orange.
Yep, same is true of potatoes and some other vegetables as well. There are many colors of those. We just tend not to see them in the grocery store because the varieties that are more transport viable are the ones that have survived over time. Lots of vegetables that we see in the grocery store today have been bred specifically to be able to be stocked in stores. So they have harder skins. They're more tolerant of changes in temperature and basically sitting for a while in spaces where they are waiting to be bought. Whereas the tomatoes that we grow in the garden here at Gunston Hall, you can't hardly get them out of the garden before the skin split. So it's a really good question. Thanks, Casey.
Now I want to look it up.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, that looks beautiful.
All right, I think we're hot enough now. Now it'll get too hot. As anyone who's fried in oil knows, it's a huge balancing act between the oil being too hot and happy Hanukkah if anyone is celebrating. I have not actually made latkes yet this year.
So is this your
My
prep?
I did eat donuts this morning. Does that count?
That brings me to our topic for next month. What are we making, Rachel?
Donuts.
Yeah, super exciting stuff. Donuts were in the new American diet in the 18th century. They come from the Dutch and German tradition of fried tidbits of dough. And the recipe that we're using comes from early 19th century, but we know that donuts.
No, it's early 18th century.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Early 18th
In
century.
Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
And spelled D-O-N-U-T.
Yep.
So if you are, I'm just going to tell you. So if you, I know we have a lot of people who come every month. So I'm going to tell you that if you are going to join us for donuts, the recipe has you fry them in butter. And as my son, who has tested many a donut, would say, they're good in butter, but they're better in oil. So you make your choice in January if you're going to make donuts with us. So let's see. I think those first two I made are done. Let me pull them out. I have a plate with paper towels over here. I'm going to let them cool a little bit before we look at the insides. Look at this. I made a cute little tiny one for some reason.
So, Rachel, we have a question in the chat. Was the size or shape of this dish ever bigger? Were the fritters ever made bigger? And I think the answer is probably yes.
Yeah,
Um,
there's no size. Yeah, it doesn't give you any size guidance in this recipe at
there are
all.
there are some. One of the recipes that we make on the regular is one for waffles, which indicates that the dough should be made in balls the size of a walnut or the size of a nutmeg. But this one doesn't have that kind of definition on size. We have another question. Would these be served as a side dish for meals?
I think so, but everything sort of went on the table at once, Lacey. You're real good at explaining that one.
Yeah. So everything, as Rachel was indicating, particularly in higher levels of society, everything went on the table at once in what we would today consider family style dining. Um, there were center dishes and there were also side and corner dishes. And dishes sometimes in their recipe will indicate good for a side dish, good for a corner dish. And they balanced each other. So there would be one side dish on either side of the table that matched. So you'd have two vegetable dishes or two fish dishes. Same thing with corner dishes. They paralleled each other across the table. At the less high levels of society in the 18th century, it's unclear. I suspect that everything in the same way was placed on the table all at once, and it was a little bit more free form in how they were laid out on the table, unless people were trying to strive for that higher level of society, which is pretty common. I could also see these showing up as street food. We
Yeah.
know that there were a lot of street food vendors frying up little tidbits literally right on the street so you could get something hot and fresh. If you were out on the town, if people were out on the town and say like the city of Alexandria. We don't know a whole lot about those people, unfortunately, because most of them were free people of color.
I like crispy food, so I'm gonna when I make these things, I tend to leave them in there. But these
Mhm.
are looking good, and then I'm gonna pull the first ones.
Yep. Those look tasty. Is that first batch ready for a sample, Rachel, or are you
So
not?
this
Oh,
part,
that looks so good. Slide it to, yeah, there you go. Nice. That looks great. All right, I'm ready
there
to
we
hear how these are.
go. And so again, these just need to be cooked. You need to cook the egg on the inside is what you're going with. As you haven't eaten parsnips, they're a little sweet. Oh, they're so good. So
Oh,
as I with
you've
my
got the
mouth.
heart in the reactions, Rachel.
Mm, 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 mm.
They
my
look really tasty.
my son is sitting next to me. I'm gonna have
Oh,
oh
we have another question in the chat, Rachel. Can you sub any recipe of carrots for parsnips? I think you could do this one with carrots. Yeah.
mhm.
There are specific carrot fritter recipes. Another one that we make pretty frequently for programs is carrot puffs, which is carrots, breadcrumbs, cream, more sherry or sack, sugar, and of course nutmeg. And same concept, you fry them just like this.
um so it's really I was looking when I was looking at the sauces for this recipe. Did anyone notice that it says so the normal sauce is
Me,
sack. Lacey, what does it say?
I'm gonna see if I can throw it back up on screen. Give me just a sec. So the sauce that is ordered for them is melted butter, sack, and sugar. But lemon and sugar give more quickness to the fritter and are less apt to disagree with the stomach.
I was pondering what quickness meant in this case, and I think it must mean it's lighter, which I could see, and I
Mm-hmm.
could see melted butter, sack, and sugar would definitely make these a desserty item and would be absolutely delicious. But I can see that lemon. Oh, my oil's hot. Lemon, lemon and sugar would be really, really delicious.
And I'm
And
curious if the quickness is that tart kind of
yeah,
zing to it, which is something a lot of foods want. We like that sense of acid on our
acid.
tongues as we're eating things. So we often find vinegar or lemon juice or other acidic things in foods. And when those foods don't have them, we're like, oh, something's wrong with this.
So if you see that this one keeps breaking apart, and a lot of times if your frittery things are breaking apart, a lot of times that will mean there's not quite enough egg in there to bind it together. It's a lot of times what that means.
So I want to come back. We had a question in the chat. We talked about this a little earlier, but it's possible folks might have missed it. We had a question, what is sack? Sack, today our only sack wine that has managed to survive is sherry. And these sack and sherry were and are made in the southwestern parts of Spain, Portugal, and the Canary Islands. So today it's a fortified wine. And it adds this lovely kind of florally alcohol flavor to dishes like this one. And we know actually that George Mason was looking at canary wines because there's or sacks because there's mention of canary wine in some of the documentary evidence we have about him. Although the funniest piece of documentary evidence we have about alcohol is about brandy. George Mason's sons were in the west of France, and Mason sent a letter to one of his younger sons saying that your friends are grumbling about their lack of brandy. Yeah. Oh,
My favorite is still that when he told his son to get his daughter some silk for a dress for his daughter, but not too expensive.
yeah. So we have another question. Do you think this would be good with either applesauce or like a creamy sauce?
Oh,
Absolutely. I bet this would be really good with like a yogurt sauce on it.
oh,
Like a sweet yogurt sauce would be really good.
mhm.
Applesauce would be amazing. I know I love my latkes, or as I grew up with them, Kartoffelpuffer with which is a German potato fritter. Um, I love them with applesauce. So I think that would be an absolutely fantastic combination.
And your standard Hanukkah latke is going to come is applesauce and sour cream.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that would be good on this too. I'm just enjoying watching Rachel put these in and the fizz, the boiling of the oil in there. If you're doing these at home with kiddos, I would recommend having an adult do this portion unless you've got older kids, are really comfortable with doing this kind of stuff. But they are the mashing of the parsnips, the mixing up of the ingredients. They'll whack at it for you for a while if you want to get that really light and fluffy texture going on.
My husband says every year the Hanukkah miracle is that I don't burn myself. So
Yeah, I have a slight aversion to deep wells of oil. Um, oh, we've got somebody suggesting that they might make a big batch of this and try all of the different sauce recommendations.
oh, you can make like a charcuterie board thing.
I'm loving it. Yeah. Yeah. Getting into the butter board and the
Boards
hummus
are very
board.
in.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Wondering if another way that they might have gotten this lighter and fluffier, Rachel, is by running the cooked parsnips through a sieve.
Yeah, I would think. I mean, we see that a lot in other things.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we see a lot of recipes where a particular texture is called for, whether it's very smooth or whether they're trying for something really light. The recipe will indicate that the user should run whatever boiled thing it is through a sieve. Today, of course, we could use a blender or a food processor to get the same effect.
When my mother made mashed potatoes, she always made them in a Foley food mill, which
Mm,
is still my favorite way to have mashed potatoes.
I
It
see
was,
some nodding heads. I see some people who recognize this concept.
which was sort of the one where it was
You grind it, you
a
put
pan and sort
it,
of
yeah, exactly.
where it was not quite as smooth as like when they were whipped. They still had a little bit of texture.
Mm-hmm.
And these definitely, I mean, if you had used a Foley food mill or any one of those potato mashers where you sort of squash it through the thing, obviously it would be smoother.
Yeah.
I am inherently a lazy cook. So I will never be a pretty food producer.
I will say that everything you've ever made for me, Rachel, is tasty.
It's yeah, I go with tasty and not pretty.
That's the important part.
Yeah.
Well, we're heading towards the last few minutes of the program today. If anyone has any last thoughts or questions, feel free to pop those into the chat. Oh, thanks so much for coming today. We're glad you enjoyed it. We've gotten a thank you in the chat, Rachel.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being patient with me in my first time cooking. Lacey will be on vacation in January.
I
So
will.
you will have me cooking. Carlo might be with me, my young friend who is
Young apprentice.
last month.
I'm sad I'm missing the donuts. When I realized when it was that I was going to be out of town, I was very upset. But you will be in really good hands with Rachel and with my colleague Rebecca, who will be joining you next month and is shadowing us in the background. She's behind the scenes today. So you'll be in really good hands with them next month.
I did buy gluten-free flour so I can make you some donuts.
Thank you, Rachel. I also did mention, I don't know if you saw, Karen and Donna are both with us this month.
Oh. How is everything in Normal? I want to know if any of our listeners have gotten viewers have gotten snow yet.
Well, it sounds like maybe not in Normal because the weather's a little warmer than usual. Oh, we've gotten a little bit, just a coating up in the north. Oh, we've gotten a thank you now. I'm hungry. Me too. I'm really ready to go eat these in just a minute.
You have seen when we did the potato balls, which I'm still laughing at. Someone asked, Donna, I think you asked whether there was another name for them, and I'm still laughing that there really does need to be a better name for them. That the minute we turned off the cameras, Carlo and I have never run so fast into the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah, we turned off the cameras and immediately I had a flood of people in the kitchen with me ready to eat potato balls.
So I highly recommend these. Your house will smell like oil, which is always a problem, but they are so fast and so easy to make.
Yeah, the potato balls, the parsnip fritters. So to some extent, so are the donuts. They're a little bit more intense because you got to make a dough first.
But they cook real fast.
Yeah, yeah. Our longest cooker this session is going to be the fried chicken that we're doing in February. We'll talk about some more modern but still traditional methods for prepping that, and also the 18th century procedures that were available to people.
Oil is very funny.
Yeah, it is. I think you got a lot of
I know I only had like a tiny bit left and I'm like
but you got a lot of residual stuff in there from your other batches.
Yeah. And that's why you don't overstuff a pan.
Yes. All right, as we're heading into the last couple of minutes of the program, does anyone have any last thoughts or questions for us? I think we're just all enthralled watching you make these, Rachel.
This is the potato balls too. We're like, I can't talk. I'm just watching the potatoes.
Ready to eat them. Well, just as a refresher for our next few sessions, as I mentioned, I'm not here next month. I will be very sad, but you are in excellent hands. And next month's History in the Kitchen will be donuts from an early 18th century recipe out of Scotland. The following month will be fried chicken. And then our last month in March, we are making sorrel and eggs, which is our only not properly fried dish of this session. However, it still is made in a skillet. This is sorrel and eggs or parsley mixed together and made up into an omelet. So we hope you'll be able to join us for all of those sessions. As always, the recordings will be posted on our website. You'll have to be patient with me with a little bit of time as we get these processed and loaded up. But they will ultimately be on our History in the Kitchen page on our website under the Learn tab. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. We'll hang around for a few more minutes with any other thoughts or questions. And then I imagine that everybody is going to descend on Rachel for parsnip fritters this morning.